I hope somebody can tell me where my reasoning is incorrect. I've been doing some number crunching. Okay, so we're very concerned about the poor. Okay, we're very concerned about the poor. Me, for example, if we had the budget that was not tabled 3 weeks ago, I would have been better off than I am now, because instead of 175 rand a month more in VAT, I would be paying 700 rand and a bit. But that would have been more than compensated for by the compensation for fiscal drag, which was built into that budget. So I would have been better off with that budget than this budget. The poor, who are the poor? Okay, so you're a social grant recipient and you get a SASSA grant, and you will now be getting 130 rand more for your social grant, and you will be paying, and this excludes any expenditure which will now, in addition, be VAT exempt because of the extra number of items that have been put into that basket. You will be paying 11 rand 57 more, and you're getting 130 rand more from government. If the previous budget had been tabled, then you would have been paying just close to 11 rand 80 more in VAT, and the government would have given you an extra 20 rand. So they would have given you 150 rand more than the 130 rand that they promised today to give you. So how is that not better for the poor to have had 2% VAT point and the extra social grant? If you're a family of, whatever, and you've got 5,000 rand as your income, you're poor. You're paying an extra 25 rand a month in VAT, excluding however much you're saving by buying products which are no longer carrying VAT. Where's my reasoning wrong? The ANC has said it has quieted internal dispute, tension around this. The ANC now, as a party, accepts the budget as tabled today. The IFP has told us that they accept the budget as tabled today. The DA, the EFF, the MKP, and a couple of smaller parties have said absolutely no way. Dr. Ongama Mtimka joins us now from Gqeberha, political analyst. Ongama, good afternoon.
Afternoon, John. Some impressive number crunching there.
Yeah, I'm trying to understand why this is. Look, what I'm excluding from my tiny little analysis is a third option, which is to give people a bigger social grant and no increase in VAT, but get the government the money needs from other sources that have no impact on the poor whatsoever. I'm excluding that. I'm sort of just comparing the two options that have been on the table. How difficult is the John Steenhuisen saying earlier that the 2nd of April is the key date? That is when the first of the bills which need to be voted on in order to give legislative effect to the tabled budget, that's when that bill will be voted on. So between now and then, how difficult is the horse trading going to be?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. So I was on a call last week with some investor groups that were interested in how this budgeting process is affecting the politics of the GNU.
Yeah.
And I made the point that there will be a budget presentation this week, and there was no threat on it not continuing again, because I don't think that that's what politically the ANC would like to deal with among all the political, issues that they are grappling with as a result of being in a GNU. Now, what you're making reference to is really a very interesting, and I think that it's an issue of politics of balancing among competing imperatives. When the ANC responds directly to you, the minister would say that the poor are cushioned as far as the zero rating of particular goods that are and services that are zero rated. So in that sense, they are not affected the same way as everybody else. Yes, indeed, it's important, and I heard your rebuttals there, and they are crucial for us to engage. But I think what we mustn't also forget the middle class and the missing middle, because we usually look at this time and look at the inflation-adjusted tax brackets as something that is, from which we seek relief. And then, if I heard correctly, the minister was saying this isn't going to be happening, and also, so the middle classes, in my view, are affected more severely by what's happening.
Yeah, I don't know whether I'm middle class or whatever is the income bracket beyond middle class, but I'm better off with this budget than I would have been under the budget that wasn't tabled 3 weeks ago. But that issue of not adjusting for fiscal drag, I've been looking at some numbers there, and they're not great for people who are lucky enough to get. I mean, not everybody gets increases at all, and people who do get increases don't all get increases that are at the inflation rate. But if you are, then you are going to be paying significantly more tax, and you're going to be paying half a percentage point more VAT. So I think perhaps you're correct that the impact on that missing middle class is the most powerful of the impacts of where we are at the moment, less so than on the very poor.
Yeah, and the bottom line for me, this is the cost of political ineptitude across the board. And political ineptitude referring to a time in which politicians could run amok with public finances and there was no sense of accountability whatsoever. Where I think the Democratic Alliance and other coalition partners have the most impact, it's not on dogmatism about the numbers, because quite frankly, the conduct of fiscal policy, especially for developing countries, is such that you've got limited fiscal space to do things which, when developed countries do, they have a greater degree of autonomy. So, for example, I'm looking at the policy advice that's come from leftist economists who've said we shouldn't even be worried about the debt because this is a currency that we issue, among other things. And a colleague yesterday was advancing the idea that we must acknowledge that countries in the global south face constraint as far as what other alternatives could be explored. Now, the DA for me has raised an interesting point about concessions in ports, expenditure cuts, and some other non-crucial areas. And I think those are very valid. But I'm happy that our government doesn't do, concessions with a gun on their head. Because remember, the concessions that are referred to are sources of revenue for government. And so it's important that we all scrutinize in a public way the revenue models, the business and the operating models that are proposed for every proposed concession on revenue generating infrastructure of the state. Otherwise, we see what happens in Russia, in what happened in the 90s, where you find that state ownership is problematized, but when the private players come in, they leverage the fact that these were assets that belonged to the states and didn't necessarily increase volumes and make money from increased volumes, but rather made money from squeezing out the revenues that were going to the state. That can't be the model that we use in South Africa for concessions. We have to be clear that our concessions result in that the state receives at least equal to or slightly more than what it was receiving when it had full control of the assets or the infrastructure. And the private player receives a lot of money, obviously because it's private players, on the revenues that they push and the efficiencies that they bring as a result of being brought in. Not take a dogmatic view that by simply transferring to the private sector, you have done the fiscus good.
For those views, thank you very much. Dr. Ongama Mtimka, political analyst, on the line to us from Gqeberha.